Hello, all, and welcome. We are back and continuing our 5 Minute University programming. This upcoming series is discussing crisis leadership. Today's episode is going to focus on what is a crisis and what are some of the symptoms and behaviors of crisis. Our guest today, Susan Minaya, COO and Chief Learning Strategist of Minaya Learning Global Solutions, will be joining us throughout the entire series, along with some special guests. This episode featuring Gary Avin, Director and CCO of LCEC, as well as Rachell Gallagher, a crisis manager in the private sector for national critical infrastructure. Stay tuned to learn more. Hello, Susan. Welcome back.
Hey, Dario, it's good to be back.
Yeah, so let's just get right into it. I'm curious, based on this topic, what's the difference between trauma and a crisis?
That's an important distinction. So when we talk about trauma, that's really an emotional and psychological response to an event or maybe a series of events. Think about physical or sexual abuse or something like that. And trauma has long-term effects on an individual that could last for years or even a lifetime. And it can also result in symptoms such as like flashbacks, PTSD, nightmares, severe anxiety, depression, and it really can impact daily functioning. A crisis, on the other hand, is situational and it's temporary. So it really happens within a period of time where there's intense difficulty, maybe danger or anxiety that requires us to respond and adapt to new circumstances that we weren't in before. So it is contained in the finite period of time, but it can have long-term consequences, really, like a trauma, if it's not managed effectively, which is why crisis leadership really is an important competency for leaders, especially in our current times with all the natural disasters that wreak havoc on us without warning, hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding, fires. And then you look at things like workforce impacts for employers and employees, or even onset of disease or illness. So those are some examples of that.
Okay, that was a great distinction. But since we are talking about crisis leadership, let's stay focused on that then. So what are some key behaviors that leaders should focus on in a crisis event?
So crisis really is unplanned and unexpected, right? So we didn't invite it in, but it's here for us. And it really can put an organization's survival at risk. Think about the Tylenol tampering incident. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Hurricane Ian, for example, that's really recent for us.
Yeah.
And then 9/11, right? That impacted everyone. So these are unplanned and unprecedented events. They were crises, right? They didn't really have a blueprint for getting from point A to B in the recovery process. And, everyone is shell-shocked, but the crisis leader needs to get moving to help others move through the crisis. And it's really absolutely necessary. It requires them to have agility above all else because crisis itself is dynamic and it requires change in the moment to rise to the occasion. So crisis leaders really have to be able to be agile, to move quickly, think quickly, be fast on their feet, right? And honestly, crisis leadership isn't a solitary role. And that's what I think crisis leaders have to remember. They don't have to know and do everything. It really requires collaboration with others. And when we engage our teams, for example, in moving through the crisis, it's a path towards empowering everybody to navigate the situation together. We feel like we're making progress, we're being helpful, we're doing something. And then, uncertain times require us to make assumptions and test out our theories at really a very fast pace. It may require us to create new procedures and policies to be developed in the moment without the time and the luxury of time, I guess I should say, that we often have when we're putting those things together. So it takes a lot of grit because you got to draw a line in the sand, make a decision, and move ahead. And sometimes not with all the answers, right, that you have. And then I love this by Peter Drucker. He once said, "The greatest danger in turbulent times is not turbulence, but acting with yesterday's logic." And I think that about sums it up.
I would agree with you there. Also, I do want to take a few minutes to hear from our guest. Gary, I did want to come over to you now. What are some experiences, insights, and recommendations as it relates to the skills and competencies needed for crisis leaders?
Great question. Being a crisis leader, it's not a position or opportunity or even a responsibility that one raises their hand and says, I want, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Through the work that you do, through some of the characteristics and leaderships sessions that you've excelled in life, I guess, at times crisis leaders are chosen, right? They're kind of handpicked due to your ability to either be calm enough, lead by example, and rally the troops for a common goal. Here at LCEC, we've had the opportunity, good, bad, or indifferent, to go through a lot of crisis events, hurricanes, tornadoes, you name it. And we have prepared beyond what I would like to even feel comfortable saying. We've prepared a lot for crisis. And as a leader, where some of my skills come in, and you hear it throughout my voice, just the ability to be calm,
Yeah.
rationalize things, but also know when to ask for help. Don't think you could answer all the questions or go through this alone. Get a great team around you that aren't afraid to speak up and help you through this, because we all don't know, even individually, we don't have all the answers. Collectively, we do. And that has been some of my strength, is the ability to rally the troops together, get all the leaders together, even ask the frontline agents, what are they hearing, what are they seeing to help us through these crises? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That goes back to that collaboration. You don't
Mhm.
have to do it alone,
No.
you know?
Mhm. Rachel, I did want to come over to you now. Well, there are many important things a crisis leader needs to do. But what were the essential things, I want to say, for you in your own crisis experience? For yourself or your team, your organization, the community you were in, take your pick or all.
So I think the things that come to mind most often across all of those are some core competencies. So number one, it's team. Every time. You can accomplish anything if you have built a good team, a team where you trust one another, you understand what's expected of one another, and you understand each other's capabilities. And I'm going to say areas of weakness. I'm not even going to say like areas for improvement. We all have weaknesses.
Yeah, for sure.
And when you know that about the people you're working with ahead of time, I worked for the Department of Health during COVID. We needed leaders more than what we had. And we looked at people we'd worked with previously and looked at their competencies, not what's your job title?
Yeah.
Does it have leader in it? Great, here you go. But we've seen you under pressure. We've seen what you're capable of. And we're going to use that in this time to our advantage. So it was our building of team, even in the small ways, not always in responding to a crisis, but how you build your team every day is going to be the most important factor, because you're not responding alone. Crisis management is a team sport.
Yeah, that's really an awesome way to look at
It's
it.
a good way to look at it, yeah.
A team sport. Yeah, I love what you said about the like not for a job title, but what are their competencies? Because even in business, that's really where things are starting to move, because there's so many challenges that businesses are facing, and it's like we have to be so agile. And how do we do that in a way that we're actually effective in getting the work done, or the new ideas or innovations coming through? And you're right, it's not about a job title. It's about what are your skills and competencies. And guess what? This is your job now.
And I love the word agile is perfect. So the other one I wanted to put in there is flexibility.
Oh, yeah.
So in my field, we have this saying, it's called Semper Gumby, and it's always flexible. And we have so many jokes with it, but Semper Gumby, always flexible. So this idea that, a crisis is something that you can't respond to as fast as you normally did with the resources or information that you need. That's pretty much a crisis. If you have the information and resources you need and the time to do it, it's not really a crisis, is it?
Yeah.
Right.
So if you don't have those things, you don't have the information that you would normally need or the resources to be able to respond, and you don't have the time to really gather those things, flexibility is the only way you're going to accomplish your goals.
That's a great point.
Wow, those are some great insights. Okay, Susan, I wanted to shift back over to you. So we focused on behaviors for leaders in a crisis, right? I wanted to shift focus a bit to the employees and community. So what are some symptoms and behaviors that we might see in employees and out in the community because of crisis?
Well, I think we have a lot we could talk about there. In the last 5 years here, especially for us in Southwest Florida, you think about it, we've had COVID-1, COVID-2, and then we had Hurricane Ian. So it's been pretty much a 1, 2, 3 punch for us here. Certainly, crisis leaders are going to see a lot of anxiety, and in really big crisis situations, overwhelm. People just don't know what to do, or where to start to move forward or out of that crisis. There could be sorrow, right? A lot of sadness, frustrations. You'll see outbursts where from people maybe that used to be so nice and happy all the time, and now they're just blowing up, and exhaustion, especially for people that are like put roles and things like that, or and volunteer out in the community that are just there trying to put stuff back together, bring services to people. It's exhausting, and with that, sometimes we can feel a sense of failure, I think, too. Like if we can't do enough, or, there's too much to do or too many people to help and we don't have the resources. And so there's always that risk there, that behavior that could show up. And then, sometimes isolation and, survival mode. People just feeling like that sense of lack and needing to find, I got to be first to get the gas, or I have to be here, I was before you, or, I'm first, because they're just in survival mode and think that they have to fight for what they need to get, to survive.
That's a lot to take in. With that, jumping back over to leaders, what stands out for leaders to connect the dots here?
Well, why the leaders themselves exhibit these same feelings and behaviors, because guess what? They're a recipient of the crisis, right? Whatever that may be. Their job is really, though, in this time to promote psychological safety among their employees, right? So everyone can feel comfortable and being their authentic selves, and knowing that there will be grace from the group to help navigate them through it. So it's really critical for them to be the leader, but also to be transparent about, I'm also going through this, but I'm here to help guide us through it, and and kind of really being authentic in that moment with people. I think from a community standpoint, and this is where I think our guests will really be able to shine some light on some of their observations here, because when you think about things like COVID and having to work with the community and what you're trying to do to parlay their fears, about the pandemic, or using vaccines or things like that, or if you look at something like Hurricane Ian, when you have this, people are just scrambling everywhere or don't know where to go, and you're an information provider for people or trying to keep them calm. I think that's another thing. And, and sometimes, like, the crisis doesn't always have to be catastrophic. I mean, it could be the loss of a job too, right? Or maybe when you think about a community thing, it could be, with like all the wildlife in a certain area is gone now because of a fire or something like that. But that's kind of catastrophic, I suppose. But I'm trying to really get you to understand that really leaders' role is to create and promote that psychological safety. And they have to do that. They have to be able to build trust in their employees, or they have to build trust with the community that they are a leader that's going to help navigate them through it. That's really critical.
How can leaders do this, right? I mean, it sounds like a tightrope in itself to walk, and probably a lot of boxes to tick for them to kind of, I want to say, portray this role, right? Because they're going through something too, but you have to be that psychological safety for people as well. So how can they do this?
Well, I think leaders should focus on creating a sense of safety and calm in their words, their actions, and their body language, right? So this is something leaders can practice every day, right? So we say, well, it's unexpected, but, good leaders are practicing these kind of behaviors anyway, because they're leading all the time. Maybe there's change initiatives or things like that they have to do. And really the same things that apply there kind of apply here. But the sense of safety and calm is really critical. And how you're behaving, if you're falling apart and crying up in front of everyone, a tear or two is okay, but like total falling apart is probably not a good thing to make people feel like you're in command and control and helping us get through this, So this is something that leaders really can practice every day, so that when the crisis emerges, then, they can execute on these great qualities and skills that they've been doing, and really be able to apply them in the moment.
Well, another point of thought as well off of that, practicing these qualities every day and these actions every day, in that moment of crisis, as the leader, you haven't changed, right? You kind of are that steadfast person in all this chaos that might be going on, or in all these change that's happening around you, the leader is still that person's like, oh, they're always how they have been, or they're responding how they always have been. I don't see that distress there, and maybe a little, but their words are still the same, their actions are still the same. It's just dealing with this situation now. They haven't changed as a person to handle the situation. They're like the rock that is the stability of normalcy in that situation.
Yeah, that's such an excellent point, Dario, because that's really true. Because if you show up acting inauthentic or different than you normally would, it's like people are going to pick up on that in a heartbeat, you know? So that's why we talk about, be the leader you were, and even in the time of crisis, right? But then maybe be more mindful and intentional of how you're bringing people along because of the circumstances, And I mean, this applies to even like if people are doing layoffs or they lose, that people lose their jobs. I mean, that's a crisis for people on an individual level, and, they can remind the team of their connectedness, trying to, in times of crisis, it's really good to feel like you're not alone and having all gone through the same thing, acknowledging that, while we're all unique in how we handle crisis, we all are still the same in our need to be connected and to trust one another,
Yeah. Do you have any final points as far as how leaders can practice this or do this?
Yeah, I think, my last point I guess I want to make here are about really moving the group forward through hope, vision, and an invitation to share in the work ahead to emerge stronger and even better because of the shared crisis. You're probably not going to have that conversation on day one, but, you have to be mindful about where along the curve, and we're going to talk about kind of when's the right time for these conversations, but when it is the right time, it's like, this is where leaders need to be providing a vision and, and inspiration for others that we will get there together,
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a lot of inspirational leadership.
Yeah, well, crisis leaders are inspirational leaders who help people move from point A to point B. So that's very true.
I did want to shift back over to our guest, Rachel. I want to come back to you. As a crisis leader, can you share what you have found essential to help navigate the behaviors and symptoms of employees and, community during a crisis? Is there a difference or is it the same?
It's very similar. We're all people. So whether we're at our homes and our communities or at work, at the end of the day, we're all individuals navigating difficulties and crises, and we're doing it together. And sometimes we feel like we're alone in it. So I feel like looking at this from a larger model of all of us in this together is probably my favorite piece of that. And recognizing that we're all humans through this process first, I think is number one. And then number two, in order to really help navigate, I think it's most important to understand how people behave. What are these common behaviors? I think my favorite ones that are the most common are groupthink, confirmation bias, tunnel vision, failure to challenge assumptions. That's a huge one. So if you have a failure to challenge assumptions, and then you also have that groupthink, and this is incredibly common, especially among leadership, and it's leaders' job to stop groupthink. Because you think you're the leader, everyone sees you as the leader, every day you're the one, setting the strategic path for how to move forward, everyone's just going to agree with you, even if they have information you're not aware of or a different perspective on the issue. So one of my favorite ways to combat groupthink, and I learned about it from a movie called World War Z, which if you're not aware, it is a zombie movie, but it feels appropriate, okay? And I researched it, and it's a real thing. They talk about the concept of the 10th man. I call it the 10th person, but the 10th man concept. And it was this recognition of how common groupthink is when trying to make these decisions in a crisis environment. And this idea that as soon as somebody makes a decision, everyone's like, yeah, we're on board, because they think that's what they're supposed to do. And the concept of the 10th man is to actually have a person whose job it is to question assumptions and to challenge groupthink. Even if they agree with the rest of the team, it doesn't matter. It is their job to disagree or to point out different issues, to make it someone's job. It's not personal when you make it someone's job. It's not, wow, you're crazy, out of the box thinking. It kind of encourages that.
Yeah.
And so that's one of my favorite ways to plan to combat cognitive biases. But first you have to recognize they exist.
Again, we should always be learning and growing. Now, Gary, I want to come back to you. And it sounds like you've had a lot of key takeaways from past crisis experiences. But is there something else, another key takeaway that you learned because of the crisis experience rather than knew it going in?
One thing that really stuck out this crisis, again, due to the severity and the amount of people that were affected by it, was the government influence.
Mm.
More than ever, the local, national, statewide leaders were here. This was ground zero. They needed information. We really improved our government relationships over time, especially since the last crisis, because we understood that they didn't know much about our industry and they knew about the industry, but our LCEC as a cooperative was unknown to a lot of the national and state leaders. And we needed to be front and center and really create a little more deeper dive in the government relationships since then. And we've done an amazing job of doing that, but did not prepare for that. Because again, when you're thinking of crisis from a utility standpoint, get power back on quickly, not realizing how much government is doing to assist us with that, but also communicate. So we definitely learned the importance of creating better relationships with local, federal, state government agencies to better prepare for future crisis.
Yeah, that's
Wow,
great.
that's something else. Yeah. I love hearing from multiple people.
Yeah, it makes it so much more interesting, doesn't it?
It does. Okay. So, Susan, I wanted to jump back over to you. We talked about the leader and how the leader can kind of prepare, right? And to be that person or that rock in that moment, right? And lead through a crisis, be a crisis leader. What can they do to prepare themselves to help those that they lead through the crisis as well?
Yeah, this is really important because when you're a crisis leader, you have a tendency to be all in 100,000%. I think Simon Sinek once said, "A leader, first and foremost, is human. Only when we have the strength to show our vulnerability can we truly lead." And just like their employees, crisis leaders need to walk the talk. So yes, in times of crisis, the days are stressful, they're really long, they're demanding, and likely highly emotional. And well-being should be at the top of every crisis leader's priority list, because if they're not in a state of well-being, even if they are hanging on by a thread, they cannot be crisis leaders. So self-care is so critical because it helps mitigate stress, which is super critical, especially for leaders. And a little bit of short-term stress, while we think about it, can actually, pump you up. Like, you're stressed up for the exam, and so you you just go, or you have to go do the speaking engagement. And, being a little stressed is okay, but chronic stress over time really impacts cognition and decision-making. So 2 things that crisis leaders really need to be effective in their
Yeah, I
role.
would say so. Okay, so can you give me some examples of actions leaders can take?
Of course, but they're not going to sound innovative, It's really, it's in the simple things like eating healthy, make time to eat, drink water, like take care of your body because your body needs that energy, and then exercising, whether you just take a brief walk around the building or you just take, whatever you do, move, right? Get a little exercise because it really elevates your mood. It can shift your frame of mind. It's been proven that just the simple act of walking is very healing for people because it especially like if people are sad or depressed, because it helps move them. That forward motion really does a lot to calm them down, and it does change the mood. It's been scientifically shown. And then rest and relaxation to calm your nervous system is just critical. Like you need sleep and you need to do something fun, So whatever your thing is, whether you're flying around on your social media or whether you like to read a book or whether, just take a few moments to do those, garden for 2 seconds or water your plant, whatever brings you joy to relax, then you should do that. And then I think really just being grateful for the things that are going well really helps people, understand and feel a little more centered spiritually, like, everything is not lost, right? So it inspires more hope. And so at the end of the day, crisis leaders bring their energy to the situation, right? So they're going to either bring positive energy or they're going to bring negative energy, and they really get to choose which one. And self-care is so critical in probably how they're going to show up that way. So self-care is really at the center of that choice.
Yeah, it really sounds like it. I mean, well, speaking of examples of, actions leaders could take, we have crisis leaders here that we can talk to and get their own opinion as well.
Definitely.
Rachel, I want to come back to you. Given you are a crisis leader, can you share what you did for your own well-being during your crisis experience?
Yes, I included peanut M&Ms in my go bag.
Nice. And how did it help you be a better crisis leader?
I approve.
Because I feel like it's so often we have this idea of what we need to be able to make it through. And I think so often we forget our own well-being and the things that in the moment can release some endorphins and make it a little easier to combat that stress. And so recognizing, all right, mine is absolutely peanut M&Ms. And by the way, I'm not alone in this. There were several of us that had it in our bags.
Oh, that's my go-to.
Right.
I love peanut M&Ms.
Right. So to encourage this, at my last position, we would have an annual hurricane, meeting. Like, all right, it's here. We'd have the National Weather Service come in and give us the spiel, and we talk about what we need to do to prepare. But I would always open the meeting with introduce yourself, give your name, and then tell us what item you have in your go bag that's your comfort item. And it kind of allowed for people to think of their own well-being first instead of as that extra thing you throw in. Like if you read some of the FEMA checklists of what to have in your go bag, it's, and maybe some books and cards and comfort items. And it's like, no, that should be the first thing. What's going to get you through this? And making sure you're planning that and what aligns with you. And then the other most important thing is knowing when to walk away. It's so often that leaders feel like if they leave, the site, the emergency operations center, the office, that the whole thing is going to stop turning or it's going to break the second they leave. Like the whole response is on their shoulders. And when you get to that point, you're no longer being an effective leader. So you can either train your people ahead of time, have full faith and trust in your team, and walk away knowing it's going to be a smooth transition, or you're going to be pulled out of there once you've already crossed the line of losing it, and you're going to be removed, and it's going to continue anyway. Maybe not the way you would have done it, maybe not as smoothly if you haven't trained ahead of time, but it's going to keep happening. The response will continue without your physical presence. And even knowing this, I have a hard time walking away.
Yeah.
Because I have an idea in my mind of, oh, we've already got this set up and you need me to do this and this is really important. And very often it's kind of an ego thing. And so when you walk away and it keeps going, on one hand, you're like, oh, thank goodness, it's still continuing. Clearly, we set it up well for success, but really at the end of the day, it's this feeling of if I leave, the whole thing's going to stop.
Going to fall apart.
It's going to fall apart. Yeah. It's like if you did your job ahead of time, it's not going to. And also, like I said before, we're all going to respond. It's going to happen. How well it happens determines what you do ahead of time to prepare for it. But at the end of the day, it's going to keep going without you, and that's okay.
Yeah. That's really great because, how effective are you really when you're burnt out and fried and then you start losing it in front of people and you're not much of a leader at that point, and then it really has a very negative impact, I think, on your progress maybe of navigating through the crisis. So
absolutely. I've seen people have heart attacks during a disaster in emergency operation centers. I have seen people quit right there, walk away. I've seen people be escorted out.
Oh,
I have seen all of it. And it is all because you don't have that ability to look at yourself and be like, am I in a place where I can be an effective leader? And if the answer is no, you have to walk away and trust that someone else is going to pick up that baton.
Yeah, that's a really great insight too, because it's going to still keep going on even without you. As much as you may not like to know that or think about it, but it will continue, Yeah, that's great.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining in on this conversation. Susan as well, thank you so much. So we did touch on some great points today, discussing leadership in a crisis. Key points I want to say definitely involve self-care. Definitely. Practice qualities beforehand to be that same leader before, during, and after that type of event. And those things remain such as communication, presence as a leader, etc. Well, thank you, Susan, for sharing about crisis leadership. Thank you to our guests. In our next episode, we will be looking at a VUCA environment. If you don't know what that means, well, tune in next week to learn more.
Yeah, and where this topic is concerned, I believe there's a crisis leader in all of us.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Dario.
No problem. Until next time.